The biggest mystery of the midterms, according to the New York Times, where are the Russians? David Sanger reports on the eerie calm from the nation that sowed unprecedented discord the last time we went to the polls. From that report, quote, while some say they believe President Vladimir Putin of Russia is sitting out this election, the scrutiny is intense, the argument goes, and 470 House and Senate races make it just too hard for the Russians to figure out their interests, much less manipulate the outcome. Still others find the quiet deeply disturbing, perhaps a sign of a plan to make a last-minute effort to convince voters that their ballots might not be counted or counted correctly. Joining the conversation, Jeremy Bash, former chief of staff at the CIA and Pentagon, now an MSNBC analyst. I want your thoughts on the report, but first, why would the Russians have to sort of knock themselves out? Donald Trump seems to have, ticked off most items on Vladimir Putin's to-do list. He's publicly so pro-Russia, so pro-Putin, and he seems to be doing all the work of sowing discord all by himself. That was the work that the Russians did using our social media technologies. Donald Trump seems to do that from the podium on the campaign trail himself.
Yeah, color me skeptical about this analysis, Nicole. I think you're right. Number one possibility is that the Russians got what they wanted, and they're precisely happy with the status quo. Number two is that Bob Mueller's done a great job about naming and shaming not just the Internet Research Agency, but the Russian intelligence officers, and that Russia has been deterred. But I think the most likely scenario is that the Russians are not going to fight the next war the same way they fought the last one. What do I mean by that? They're not necessarily going to just hack and dump emails from one campaign. At that time, it was the Hillary Clinton campaign, because here they would have to fight on so many different fronts. I think it's very likely that they are still very active in social media, creating fake personas, sowing discord, very active on social media sites. And what we don't know, Nicole, and this is obviously the most scary, is we don't know the extent to which they have been active in altering voter rolls and have the capacity to alter voter tabulation.
Jeremy, it also seems like so many of the forces who still had the courage, the political courage to stand up to Vladimir Putin are no longer really on the field. Bob Corker, who championed and ultimately shamed the White House into supporting sanctions, is retiring. He'll be out of office in a matter of weeks. We've lost John McCain, who is perhaps the strongest and the loudest and the most powerful skeptic and critic of Vladimir Putin. Other than the president, what else does Vladimir Putin have to navigate around in our politics?
Well, there may be some new Russia sanctions on the horizon, but I don't think they're really going to take a bite out of Russia. And fundamentally, as you noted, Russia's gotten what it wants out of the Trump administration. Trump has denigrated NATO. He's obviously denigrated the G7. He openly invited Russia to join the G7 without consulting our allies, dissing our allies on the way from the summit. And, of course, he's let the Assad regime stay in power in Syria. He's allowed Russia to get away with the murder of a supposed intelligence asset in the UK. He's emboldened countries that are allied with Russia's allies in Syria, like Iran. So I think you're right. Fundamentally, Russia has gotten a lot out of this administration. Their goal is really going to be focused on 2020 to keep Donald Trump elected.
And what would you expect? You talked about the Russians sort of innovating beyond what they did. They're not going to hack a DNC server again. They're going to do something more audacious. When we talk about massive intelligence failures, and this is your expertise, not mine, we talked about the failure of imagination before 9/11. We talked, I think people that came out of the Obama administration and national security agencies, again, talked about choking, I think was the blind quote in a Washington Post analysis several months later. What are we failing to imagine that the Russians would have the audacity to do, in your estimation?
I think our Achilles heel is voter registration. In every state, in every jurisdiction, there has to be produced a list of who is eligible to vote. Now, just bracket for a second whether that even makes sense. Why do we need that in the day and age of biometrics and other ways to authenticate people's identity and their age? But let's just posit that there is such a thing as voter registration. That's a weak link because those have to be connected to a network. Those have to be connected fundamentally to the Internet. And that's an area where the Russians can manipulate and alter those voter rolls.
How psyched are the Russians that we're sitting here, and I don't assume they watch this show, but I know they take in a lot of American media, that we can't even think of what's left for Donald Trump to do for Vlad?
Well, they've clearly been incredibly successful with 2016 and with all the chaos that they wreaked havoc during that election. And then now the fact that they're, seemingly on their heels a little bit and sitting this one out, which we don't really know, but seemingly that puts everyone on edge too, just because we don't know what the possibility is so terrible about what they actually could be doing.
I'm with Jeremy. I'm skeptical that this represents the whole picture, and it seems to me that if Robert Mueller were about to dump a report, if there were one of you reported that there was going to be a report that it may include articles of impeachment, that you could still see a massive Russian disinformation campaign and smear effort to delegitimize someone who might threaten their man in the White House.
Sure. There's no reason to suggest that they wouldn't take that step. I mean, yes, there have been sanctions. Yes, Mueller's made his indictments, but the President of the United States has still never really admonished them. He's never gone up there and said to Russia, like, don't you ever do this again. We will take these, drastic repercussion steps if you do. And we still don't know, as we were just talking about, we still don't know what Putin and Trump talked about for their 2-hour secret meeting in Helsinki. They're supposed to meet again at the end of next week for a little while in Paris. They're both going to be there for the celebration of the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I. This is still a president who, we had John Bolton just recently say that Vladimir Putin will be invited to the White House at some time next year. Like, this is still, he is very, very keen on making this as close a relationship as possible. And if that's the case, he's not going to take those steps to really whack Russia around and to tell them to stay out of our business.
Jeremy Bosch, how can this get worse?
Well, I think it can get worse if the secret diplomacy continues and if it impinges on things like nuclear weapons. We saw, again, earlier the president announced that he wants to withdraw from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty that was signed by President Reagan in 1987. If Trump and Putin launch a secret negotiating channel and they strike a sacred deal that both sides will massively increase their nuclear weapons, that's a very dangerous recipe for both countries and for our world.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.